The psychiatrist who was treating Colorado movie massacre suspect apparently had warned a University of Colorado threat assessment team that he could have been a danger to others, but no action apparently was taken. And people are asking, why not? I'm saying it is not that psychiatrist's fault in all probability, in my opinion. Her credentials, I've looked at them carefully. They are exceptional. She's not only a highly well-trained and published psychiatrist, she was a physical medicine specialist before that. This is the real deal, this woman. She is a highly trained professional, and she did, based on what we've seen and heard so far, what I would say would be probably the only action she could have taken, given confidentiality laws the way they are, which is to notify the university assessment team the potential to evaluate this kid for trouble. She, I suspect we're going to find out, was functioning at the highest professional level and probably did no wrongdoing. That's my opinion. But joining me to discuss this, Brian Claypool, he's criminal defense attorney, and Brett Sokolow, a specialist in campus safety and security. He's the founder of the National Center for Higher Education Risk Management. I want to go out first to Brett. Now, Brett, you actually were part of the organizations that set into motion the really increasing awareness about assessment and potential for violence on the heels of the Virginia Tech tragedy. So, in reality, these organizations were supposed to stop or at least reduce the risk of precisely what happened at Virginia Tech, and now here we have almost the same thing playing out. What went wrong? Was it the psychiatrist or was it the assessment team? What do you think?
Well, Dr. Drew, at this point, I don't think that anything went wrong, or at least we don't have any indication that it did. As a matter of fact, I think the information that went to the team at CU Denver indicates a team that was functioning well. There was a transmission of information, and what we don't know at this point is whether they found him to be a significant threat and somehow didn't act on that, or whether at the time they had information that he was concerning, maybe even had some mental health issues, but those didn't necessarily correlate to violence. They often don't, and so maybe it took reasonable action under the circumstances. We just don't know yet what those circumstances are.
And Brett, how about, what do we tell people who say, well, did this assessment team drop the ball because this kid dropped out from school? And let me frame the question a little differently. I would think that the assessment team would still have an ethical obligation to that kid, even if he withdrew from CU.
Yeah, one of the things, and I helped to run NBITA, which is the National Behavioral Intervention Team Association. One of the things that we train on, and we've trained 700 or 800 of these teams across the country, is that when a student either withdraws from college or the institution acts to separate the student for safety reasons, that's not an opportunity to wash your hands of the situation. That actually may be a time for increased monitoring. It may be that the separation precipitates violence, agitates the individual, activates a desire for revenge. And so rather than saying he's outside of our control at that point, there are a number of tools in the toolbox that colleges and universities can enact, even with someone who is no longer a student.
Brian, when I hear Brett say that, though, it sounds like they did drop the ball at that assessment team. Again, I have real trouble with people pointing fingers at this psychiatrist. I think we're going to find out she did everything right, but I'm worried about that assessment team.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure I agree with you 100% that this psychiatrist did everything correctly. Look, at some point in time in our society, we have got to put responsibilities legally on people like psychiatrists, educators, who have access to students, who have access to patients, who are coming to them and saying, hey, I'm a threat, I might harm somebody. Let me ask you, you've got a patient who comes to you, right, like this guy Holmes, and you're sensing that this guy is a ticking time bomb. Okay. He's ready to go off. So what do you do?
So, Brian, let's say he says, I'm feeling aggressive, screw you, Dr. Pinsky, I'm not going to listen to anything you say. What do I do? Well, I call police? What are they going to do?
Okay, not at that point. But what if he comes to you? Okay, I'm James Holmes.
What are they going to do when I call police? So unless he says, I have guns, police are on the same constraints as a psychiatrist is. Unless he says, I'm going to kill people, they're going to say, hey, let's see your gun registration. We got an eye on you. That's it. They're going to leave him in his home.
Look, I bet you anything, if we ever get access to that file, you're going to see something in that file that's a trigger. Something in there where Holmes is saying to Dr. Fenton, hey, I think I want to harm somebody. I think I'm going to go out and buy a gun. I don't see any purpose in life anymore. I want to go shoot up somebody. If you have something in there like that, then you have an obligation to call.
Agree.
You got to pick the phone up and call law enforcement. You can't call a bunch of bureaucrats in a university and expect them to go do something.
Okay.
People in the mailroom couldn't even open up the mail.
Brett, so what is the difference between a psychiatrist's obligation, help people understand this, between calling law enforcement, putting somebody on a hold, which are two possibilities they could do. Again, you could hold somebody against their will, you can call law enforcement, or you call the assessment team. What's the difference?
Well, I think there are a lot of possibilities open to a mental health professional in a situation like this. She or he could deal directly with the client and leave the relationship to confined to that. That individual could go to parents and involve them in the situation, which can often be a very effective type of intervention. The psychiatrist or mental health professional could contact the campus team, who is a team of trained, proficient administrators, not bureaucrats, looking to protect the campus and hopefully see the individual succeed as a student. There's the possibility of the mental health resources of the surrounding community, which could include a 72-hour hold, involuntary hospitalizations after that hold, and there's also the possibility of going to police. Going to police, though, do we go to the police where he lives? Do we go to the police on campus? Do we go to the police where he may enact violence? What if we don't know where he may enact violence? So
and by the way,
I agree with this statement. Yeah, I agree with the statement that a psychiatrist or a mental health professional in Colorado has a duty to warn. But that's not something we need to enact into law. It already exists into law. If Fenton, in this case, did not call police or did not notify anyone who was at risk, it was because she didn't sense the threshold was present.
I disagree with that.
If you blow that away, and well, we don't know, but if you blow away the confidentiality, what happens is the patients don't communicate with their mental health providers. If you want to shut down that communication, people won't get help.
That's the conundrum. If you say, I'm going to notify law enforcement if you tell me something worrisome, or if I even have an inkling of trouble, those people withhold some of that information to their psychiatrist. Take a call. Nikki in New Hampshire. Nikki.
Yes, hi. I have personal knowledge of how this can work if you communicate something that seems untoward during a session.
Were you yourself in a session where you said something that triggered action?
Yes, yeah.
What happened?
The first thing I can tell you is from a university setting that when I was at a prominent school here in Boston area, I became anorexic and went in one semester from about 130 pounds to 88 pounds. And they asked me to leave for a semester or longer until I could get my act together and be functioning because of the safety issues. So I think if you've got a good team on the university campus that pays attention, you're going to be noticed.
Okay. Okay. So your point is that based on Nikki's experience, that the assessment teams, whether it is to keep somebody safe or prevent violence, there are professionals there ready to help, ready to separate the institution from the student or reach out right in that moment. I got to tell you, Brian, it is very difficult. I've been working in a psychiatric hospital for a couple of decades, and what bothers me is that a physician's intuition doesn't carry much weight. It doesn't. Because let's say my intuition is somebody's going to be a problem. I call law enforcement. What are they going to do? They can't do much of anything. I can't put somebody on a hold based on intuition. I can call the assessment team, but then they can't do that much either.
I disagree with that.
That's the law. That's the way it is.
But the law needs to change then, because what happens here is if Fenton calls law enforcement, or the lazy folks at the university who did nothing, nobody even opened the mail, nobody cared about the report to the crisis intervention team. If any one of those folks call law enforcement, I guarantee you, they go take one look at this dude, and they're going to get search warrants, they're going to fill out probable cause affidavits, they're going to get over to that clown's apartment, and they're going to preempt this entire massacre. At some point, people have to go on instinct. What's in your gut? You're probably sharp at that. It's no different than law. We go on a gut and instinct. I'll bet you know, looking back on your career, looking back at some of your patients, who might have been more of a risk than others.
My patients die regularly, drug addicts, because my intuition can't be supported by the law. I can't intervene and take somebody's rights away from them based on my intuition. I wish I could. I could save a lot of lives of drug addicts, but I can't. But your point is well taken. I've got to go to break. Okay. I agree with you saying. I wish we could change that law. Brett, I think you would agree with us, too, if we could have a little more flexibility with intuition. But, Brett, I really want to thank you for stepping in here, because this is a very complex area. We didn't even get into the whole issue of HIPAA versus FERPA versus whose records and what we can look at. Let me just ask one thing before we go to break, Brett. when do you think we're going to get to see records and get information where we can really start to look at what's going on here?
Well, and I think, gut instincts are one thing, but that doesn't substitute for a good threat assessment. But in terms of the information, it's dribbling out now. I think it'll continue to dribble out despite the gag order over the next couple of weeks. And I think probably within 2 weeks, we'll have a very good sense of what the team knew and whether its actions were appropriate. And until then, I continue to be hopeful that they were a well-trained team doing what they needed to do and that they did act appropriately.
I hope you're right. I am 100% behind this psychiatrist at this point. I think people pointing fingers at her are making a grave mistake and really causing another human to suffer, another victim unnecessarily. But Brian feels otherwise. And I'll get you guys both back to talk about this. Thank you, Brett. Thank you, Brian.